Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, I want to show you the very best expanded deck that we have, well, in the format right now, the best expanded deck. You see, over in Japan, they had a very large regional recently, and I showed you that the winning deck in Standard, and remember we are in the same format as Japan at the moment, was a rather lovely Pikachu and Zekrom deck, playing stuff like Tapu Koko V. Well, I didn't show you the best expanded deck, so, let's fix that, shall we? And it is a deck that is very much based around Junk Hunt Sableye. Now remember, we did have this weird hand control deck using a whole bunch of stuff like Lieutenant Surge's strategy and Jirachi EX and Island Challenge Amulet. And it was a very weird, very cool, very fun deck, but it was also genuinely full on broken and led to a whole bunch of cards being banned, which is why we're in a very different deck to what we saw before. So anyway, I started telling you about Sableye, Junk Hunt Sableye. It's been around for a very long time, and it's here, shockingly enough, for the attack, Junk Hunt. And what you do for a single energy card is you get to search your deck for 2 item cards and put them into your hand. Cool. You're just recovering item cards. And the goal of this deck is not to take giant KOs. The goal of this deck is not to knock out all of your opponent's Pokemon. The goal of this deck is to frustrate your opponent, take away all of their resources, and make it so they cannot win the game. It's not quite the hand disruption deck we saw before, but make no mistake about it, the expanded format is still being ruled by disruption decks that stop your opponent rather than you actively trying to take prizes. So we'll get to all the item cards we're using in a moment, but a few other Pokemon we need to mention rather quickly. We have a Bunnelby in here. Now, Bunnelby actually has 2 really good attacks, and it's got the lovely ancient trait Omega Barrage. Just lets you attack twice. And for 1 colorless energy, either you discard the top card of your opponent's deck, or you shuffle a card from your discard pile into your deck, and this is any card, doesn't have to be an item. So you can discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck if they're getting close to decking out. This is where you've gotten rid of a bunch of their resources, they're going to deck out, this speeds up the process. Or you can recover a bunch of cards, especially non-items, that you cannot get back using Sableye, although a lot of the time it just ends up being for a little bit of faster decking out. We have 1 copy of Oranguru, which has the resource management, gets any free cards from your discard pile onto the bottom of your deck. It is nice for recovering cards. It is nice for recovering multiple cards. Really, if you're recovering cards, this is better than Bunnelby. Bunnelby is generally better for the milling, for discarding cards in your opponent's deck. We then have 1 copy of Mimikyu here. Now this is the Mimikyu that came out in Cosmic Eclipse, but not the one that we usually see that came out in Cosmic Eclipse, which blocks your opponent's abilities. It is the one that for a single colorless energy, you get to discard a supporter card from your hand, and use the effect of that card as the effect of this attack. It's kind of fun. It just lets you use an extra supporter during your turn. We'll get to the supporters and why we might want to do that in a moment. And then we have 1 copy of Durant. I know, right? Durant. Now, this is the one that actually came out way back when in Flashfire, but remember we are in the expanded format. Chip off. Discard cards in your opponent's hand at random until he or she has 4 cards in his or her hand. This is if your opponent is trying to build up a large hand of cards so they can have 1 gigantic turn to set themselves up. Or if they've just got a couple too many cards in their hand and they're making you nervous, this is your answer to that. So it's generally going to be Junk Hunt. It is very much a Junk Hunt deck, but you've got Oranguru to recover non-item cards, Bunnelby for a little bit of milling, Mimikyu to use extra supporters, and Durant if your opponent builds up a large hand of cards. So what kind of stuff are we playing here? Well, we've got both Crushing Hammer and Enhanced Hammer. Crushing Hammer discards any energy from your opponent on a coin flip. Crushing Hammer discards a special energy with no coin flip. Now, remember, we're not going to be playing many of these. We're playing 1 Enhanced Hammer, 2 Crushing Hammer, because really here, we can just play 1 or 2 and be recovering them every turn. We're only ever going to want to play 1 Enhanced Hammer, so we play 1. Crushing Hammer, we play 2 because we might flip tails. There's no point playing more than 2, you're only recovering 2 item cards per turn. And needless to say, in this deck, we need Gladion. We're not taking prizes, we're trying to win by decking our opponent out. So we're not going to draw our prizes, so we need to be able to get them. That's where Gladion comes in. We have 4 copies of Puzzle of Time. Now this lets you recover any card, but it is banned in our expanded format. We don't have this, Japan does. It's really not the end of the world, because the vast majority of cards in this deck are item cards. The ones that aren't items but are supporters, we can recover with Versus Seeker, and anything else we really need can be got with Oranguru. You know, we're playing energy retrieval to get our energy back. So we never really need Puzzle of Time. It's nice to have in there for a little bit of extra consistency, but it is not an absolutely vital part of the equation, so don't worry about it too much. We're actually playing 4 copies of Clefairy Doll, or Lily's Polka Doll, and 4 copies of Robo Sub, bearing in mind that in the expanded format, we are allowed to play both of them. And we're also playing Life Dew here. Now, Life Dew is a card that you attach to a Pokemon, and it gives up 1 less prize. It is our ace spec of choice here. And basically, you're trying to not give up 6 prizes. Now, the general rule, and this is where Puzzle of Time does come in super handy, is that what you really want to do is recover Life Dew using Junk Hunt when your opponent cannot take a prize. Because otherwise, they KO you, oh, you've got Life Dew, it's fine. Next turn, you Junk Hunt for Life Dew, but you don't have Life Dew attached. And then your opponent takes a KO and does get to take a prize. That is the one time Puzzle of Time really comes in handy, because you essentially Junk Hunt the Puzzle of Time in advance. And the turn where your opponent KOs you and you cannot Junk Hunt for the Life Dew without giving up a prize, you've already Junk Hunted for the Puzzle of Time, you use them to get Life Dew back, job's a good un. I still don't think it kills the deck, but it is worth pointing out that that is when Puzzle of Time really comes into its own. But between Life Dew, which can be Junk Hunted, and your 4 Lily's Polka Doll and your 4 Robo Sub, I mean, you can legitimately set up a board here, which is 6 in combination of Lily's Polka Doll and Robo Sub, where your opponent just cannot take a prize. I know, right? They can knock out multiple Pokemon turn after turn and not take a prize. Now, we are trying to win by decking our opponent out. We do need a way to speed it up, and we do have a couple of ways to do so. One of them is Belelba and Bryson Man. You discard the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. It is absolutely huge in a deck like this. Absolutely gigantic. Now, it does discard the top 3 cards of your deck as well, but again, you've got Sableye, you've got Oranguru, you've got Bunnelby. You aren't going to be decking out here. You can recover cards quite nicely. If you're not willing to discard cards from your deck, don't forget we've still got Team Rocket's handiwork. Now, it is flippy, but you flip 2 coins, and for each heads, you discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. Flippy, but you don't have to discard your own deck. I'm going to leave that choice up to you. But remember, you've got Versus Seeker to reuse them. While we're talking supporters, we've got Team Flare Grunt, discards energy of your opponent's active Pokemon, so more energy denial. We've got Pokemon Ranger, which removes any effects on your Pokemon, which can be good for certain matchups. So let's say your opponent uses something like Seismitoad to item lock you. Well, this removes all effects on each player and his or her Pokemon, so this will un-item lock you. And then, of course, you can immediately use Versus Seeker to get it back. and then you can junk hunt the Versus Seeker, so that essentially, even when you're item locked, you ain't item locked. We've got a couple copies of N, so that if your opponent does take a big lead, you can make them have a very small hand. We've got 4 copies of Green's Exploration. If you've got no abilities, you get to search for any 2 trainer cards. You're not playing abilities, you're really relying on trainer cards. And Steven's Resolve, which ends your turn and lets you grab any free cards. Especially in the early game, when junk hunting isn't as important, because there's nothing you need to junk hunt for, it's all still in your deck, Steven's Resolve becomes absolutely huge. Now, when it comes to Stadium of Choice here, we've got 2, but outside of Japan, we've got 1. The one we're going to be playing is Tropical Beach. Lets you draw until you've got 7 cards in hand, but ends your turn. That is our only choice, because in Japan, they can also play Player's Ceremony, and this deck does play 2 copies of Player's Ceremony. This has not been released over here as it stands. We do not have this card. It's kind of like Tropical Beach, but instead of drawing till you've got 7 and ending your turn, you draw a flat 2 and end your turn. It stops you having to reduce your hand size to draw extra cards. It's not often going to be a huge deal, but it is very much worth bearing in mind that we are forced into using Tropical Beach. That's the only option we've got. Outside of that, we got a couple of Trainer's Mail to help us draw into our cards, or trainer cards, a little bit more easily. A couple of Nest Ball to find our basic Pokemon. The entire deck is basic Pokemon. A couple of Counter Catcher to search as Gusting if you're behind on prizes, which you basically always will be. And of course, what you really want to do here is drag a Pokemon in the active that's not going to be a good attacker. It's then going to make it much easier to mill your opponent and deck them out. 1 Field Blower to get rid of your opponent's tools and or stadiums if they're relying on them. 1 Professor's Letter to search out your energy. Remember, we've got a lot of cards here, like Green's Exploration, that will get your item cards. So having an item card that will then search your energy becomes pretty huge. And 1 copy of Target Whistle. Target Whistle lets you go and grab a Pokemon from your opponent's discard pile and put it onto their bench. And here we're looking at the combo with Counter Catcher. So if your opponent doesn't bench a pointless Pokemon with which they can't attack, especially a high retreat one, you Target Whistle it, then you drag it in the active. And again, between Junk Hunt, Green's Exploration, etc., you shouldn't be struggling particularly much here trying to actually get these item cards into your hand. So it's really not a big deal here. And it makes a great combo. This is a deck that's very difficult to play. It's a slow deck. It's not the world's most exciting deck. But it is a deck that can completely and utterly overwhelm and suffocate anything you try and do. And that leads to a win rather, well, not quickly. Quickly is not the right word. But shall we say a slow march to an inevitable victory. We might have banned a bunch of cards to stop all of these decks that give you a 0-card hand and win instantly, but make no mistake about it, this is still a disruption deck, it is a milling you out deck, and oh my goodness, it's a very good deck. But at this stage, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to know what you think about this deck. Does it look fun? Or is it a kind of deck you would rather not be playing against? Go nuts in the comment section, but please remember the rule. Be nice, would you? And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WasiPlays, where you can find out about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but do have awesome. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.